More than 1,000 gas workers for National Grid have been locked out since June 25th. But with the pipeline explosions and fires in Merrimack Valley, the contract dispute is being viewed with a deepening concern for public safety. That's the background for efforts by 3 city councilors to spotlight the natural gas infrastructure and preparations for emergency in Boston. We'd like to welcome one of them, the district councilor for West Roxbury in Jamaica Plain, Matt O'Malley. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Great to be with you, Chris.
I know we're talking about up in Merrimack Valley, a different company, different workforce, sure. But as you saw those initial news reports, what was going through your head?
I was shocked. I was terrified that the death toll would be larger than it was. Admittedly, one life taken is one too many. It didn't seem real. It seemed as though I was watching a movie as I saw the coverage through Thursday night and then into Friday morning. And also a real sense of trepidation that what happened there could happen in the city of Boston. I'm not trying to create a panic here, but I do think that every municipality, particularly older cities such as Boston that have older infrastructure, need to be doing everything they can to make sure that the streets are safe.
Well, one thing you know very well is that we have an old infrastructure that has some cracks and leaks to it, and that the utilities are working on these too. So what else do we need to know?
Oh, I think there's a lot more we need to know. We have older infrastructure. I believe that Boston has either the 3rd or 4th oldest infrastructure as it relates to their natural gas pipeline in the country. We have anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 to 4,000 gas leaks, some of which are very, very high volume. We have in part of my district the new West Roxbury lateral pipeline, which is a very large-scale, heavy, it's about 750 PSI pipeline. And I want to be clear, they haven't yet determined what the cause of the explosions and fires in the Merrimack Valley were. They're saying it may be more having to do with pressurization, so that's something that we are obviously acutely sensitive to as it relates to the West Roxbury lateral. Gas leaks can pose a threat. We have had isolated instances through the years of explosions, of fires, of major leaks that have caused obvious, incredible disruption. So I think that we have an opportunity here, and the reason why Ed Flynn, Ayanna, Pressley, and myself called this hearing together is that we can make sure that we are doubling, tripling, and quadrupling all of our safety oversights. We want to make sure that all of the different stakeholders are talking to one another, and not only the utility company, the city agencies, but the state DPU as well. I think that is an agency that is chronically underfunded and undermanned and understaffed. We want to make sure we can do everything we can to get the grid workers back to work. These are the men and women who know the streets. These are the men and women who are the pros that we want to serve and make our streets safer. And that's the specific purpose of this hearing that we'll be calling within the next couple of weeks.
Well, the utility in Merrimack Valley had, I guess, its normal workforce on the job, and you still had this big problem. In Boston, areas served by National Grid, we have a replacement workforce. How does that color this?
I think that that provides an added level of concern. Again, the purpose of the hearing is to really make sure that we can better coordinate every safety protocol and procedure, that we can better communicate with residents, that we can, God forbid, in the event of emergency, have a safety plan. But part of this conversation ought to be about getting the USW workers, the men and women of National Grid who have been locked out. They are not on strike, and that is a point that needs to be underscored. These men and women want to go back to work. They're the pros, they're trained, they should be back on the streets. Honestly, after the tragedy in the Merrimack Valley, I thought at least that would accelerate a resolution between the British management company of National Grid and the men and women who've been locked out. And it's been very disheartening that in nearly 2 weeks since we haven't seen any closure come to that.
Well, what's the responsible thing for political leadership to do? Because you don't want to meddle too much, but on the other hand, you got to look out for public safety.
That's absolutely right, Chris. I have said all along, I'm not looking to create a panic. I'm not looking for a hearing that is going to be overly adversarial and people fighting and pointing fingers at one another. Truly, the purpose of this effort that Councilor Flynn, Pressley, and myself are doing is to make sure that we are sharing as much information as humanly possible. that we are identifying a better accelerated program for fixing gas leaks, which is something I've been working on with my colleagues for a number of years now. Grid actually, after we passed a pretty robust and effective and not overly onerous gas leaks bill back in 2016, National Grid sought litigation and had some success as it relates to the implementation of the ordinance. But rather than fighting with us or trying to delay the inevitable, I would much rather see all efforts coming together to address these issues, to fix these leaks, to update this infrastructure, to make sure that we had the most talented men and women who are the workers who are currently locked out back at the job. And again, another part of this is we need to have a real conversation about moving away from traditional fossil fuels and really looking at renewable energy sources. That's something that cities and towns and the state, quite frankly, need to take a leadership role on, and that should be part of this conversation as well.
This is Ayanna News, and we're talking with City Councilor Matt O'Malley. The other part you want to look into is the preparedness. We got to be resilient. So if the worst case actually happens, people have to be taken care of.
Yeah.
What about the city's ability to do that?
So again, I think this is something that we need to be having a conversation of, regardless of what had happened in the Merrimack Valley, as it relates to weather events, as it relates to man-made climate change and how that really affects coastal cities such as Boston. But it underscores, again, when something like what happened in the Merrimack Valley could happen here, that we need to do a better job, both communication with our residents. You drive around Boston and you'll see these blue evacuation route signs, and I'm not quite sure where they end up pointing to us, but what the plan is in the event of emergency, what people should be looking for. After what happened in the Merrimack Valley, you saw a number of social media posts of sort of a drawing and an explanation on how to shut off your emergency gas valve. I think that served a purpose of educating people. It's too bad that it took a tragedy to do so, but these are all things we can talk about as it relates to preparedness, from the city level, from the neighborhood level, from the block level, from the individual home level. We need to make sure that we're sharing information, we're coming up with a plan, we're talking to people, and we really have every scenario, worst case, best case, middle case scenario planned out, and people know how to get safety in the unlikely but real event of a gas line issue, a weather event, a whole host of issues.
Turning to another topic that the council has been involved in, you and your colleague recently took a vote on question 3. This is about access to bathrooms on the basis of gender identity, and I guess you wrote the resolution for that.
I did, and I would respectfully say I view question 3 in somewhat different terms as a tool that's been has been put before the voters that has to do with equity and equality, and that's what this is really all about. 10 plus years ago, I served as the political director at Mass Equality. In my role there, I was working with the state legislature to try to come up and advance, along with a whole host of stakeholders, the Transgender Non-Discrimination Act. We were unsuccessful. It took about 8 years before it went through. It passed both houses of the legislature. It was signed into law by Governor Baker. It is a statewide law based on what was done in the city of Boston in 2002. It has been overwhelmingly successful. It's actually made our Commonwealth more safe. And sadly, a bunch of individuals collected signatures to repeal that bill, which I think would have devastating effects if it were to be repealed. So I was proud to have authored a resolution that passed unanimously from the council that is affirming the city council's position that all residents should be taking a yes vote on question 3. It's a little bit confusing the way it's worked. If it's a repeal of a law, although proponents have placed it on the ballot, a yes vote will keep the law as it is. So that's what we're just underscoring, the importance that we need to vote yes for equality, yes for equity, yes for common decency, and yes for dignity.
And yes for less confusion. Thank you for
yes
clarifying.
For less confusion.
City Councilor Matt O'Malley.